All right, let's stay on this story now and bring in Not In My Name President Siyabulela Jentile, who to speak to us on the scourge of gender-based violence and femicide. A very good afternoon to you. Thank you so very much for joining us here on SABC News, sir.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me, Flo.
You're most welcome. We keep having these discussions with women around gender-based violence. You've been more involved on the side of men talking about, accountability. How are you doing in terms of getting the message across? As it seems that, this is all falling on deaf ears. If we look at, the current case that we're dealing with the student who was brutally murdered, the Fort Hare student who was brutally murdered. This happens all the time, isn't it? I mean, we hear a story, we get upset, we talk about it, we have people like you on the show, and then, the cycle repeats itself. Does it seem that you're failing to get the message across?
Yeah, Flo, it's a very, sad state of affairs, what is happening in South Africa. But the conversation around accountability, in this conversation that we are having is always centered around gender roles that still place women at a disadvantage, and it puts us men at an advantage. And we need now to start admitting that the status quo as it is, it favors us men, and that the social fabric of our society has for years been made up of male supremacy and female subordination, such that even in our own families, we teach boys that it is masculine and acceptable to be aggressive, but we teach our little girls that it is more feminine and acceptable to be submissive. So these conversations that we are having are always centered around that the realization that much of the barriers to equality will start in our own families, in our own homes, where legislation unfortunately does not reach. So we are aware that we've been having this conversation for many, many years, and that gender stereotyping, it remains entrenched at all levels of our society because they feed off a social system of social stratification and differentiation on the basis of sex, which, as I said earlier, places material advantages to men while placing disadvantages to women. So it may seem as if we are not making any more progress, I really need to say that, we are making progress. I mean, even if it's one man whose mindset has been changed, it means that there is something that we are doing right. And unfortunately, there will always be those among us who feel that women they're subordinates and that who treat women as secondary citizens. And those we are saying that the harshness of the law must be unleashed upon them.
Yeah, it seems that you did touch on it briefly there when you spoke about gender stereotypes. And what I was going to ask you is, to talk to us about, what you've identified as an organization as being, the root cause of, what we're struggling with now, which is a GBV. I mean, with every problem or crisis, there is always, a root cause, and I wonder, what is that? I think that maybe we're looking at the problem, we're focusing on it when it's too late, when it's already grown, when it's already there, and we're not really looking, at the root causes and addressing it from the root. We can't just be, as I say, reacting after every brutal murder or every terrible incident of gender-based violence and then, go back as normal and start the cycle again. Perhaps it's time that we address the root causes. And how do we begin then to do so?
Yes. And just on that, Flo, we need to understand something, that masculinity, and that is where we get what is now called the toxic masculinity, when we try to justify the violence of men, is that masculinity on its own is not static. It is a dynamic process that is influenced by a process of socialization. And this is what we believe in as an organization, that it is through that process that a man negotiates his identity through an experience exchange, or through an exchange of different experiences. It is also through that very same process that young boys negotiate or they rather transition from boy to man. That is where we are saying that in that process of socialization, something happens to the boys. The example that I made, that in our own families, we treat boys different from girls. That is why then we believe that in order for us to successfully combat gender-based violence, we need to go back to the root causes, which is the socialization of boys. And not only boys, but girls also, as well as the entire society, to say that it cannot be that we teach our boys that it is acceptable to be aggressive, and our girls that they must also be. So what is it that we must do? We must be confrontational, but yet measured in our response to violence against women and just violence in general. We had always said and maintained as an organization that we need to continue to strengthen the criminal justice system and hence policy framework. And as I also mentioned earlier, that we need harsher sentences. But running parallel to those harsher sentences, we need effective rehabilitation programs. Those of us who are working the ground, we must continue to intensify our mass education and prevention campaigns. And lastly, we need the gender-focused policies and programs that can further enable girls and women to realize their full economic potential. So while we are doing that, we should also try, in parallel to that process, try and re-socialize our boys differently while we are working on the legislation, while we are, working on issues of unemployment as well. Because some of these women, they stay in abusive relationships because they are unable to, to survive without their abusers. So there's a lot of things that we need to do. And part of our job as a civil society and as activists on the ground is that we need to mobilize all men across the value chain, all sectors of society, to say that men are a reflection of a merely broken collective. And this brokenness is a direct result of harmful socialization that I mentioned earlier. It can be through tradition, through media, through religion, through education, even politics themselves. So it is the society that is broken, and we need to change the social scripts because they've been passed on from one generation to the other, allowing new members of our society to partake in this, in this negativity, which we call, through a process we call social reproduction. So there's quite a lot of work that we need to do, and all of us must do something about it.
As we wrap up our discussion, Siyabulela, you talk about the fact that your organizations like yourselves are working on the ground, you're activists on the ground, and you also mentioned on the back of that implementing effective programs. So perhaps this is where then people like you then come in, organizations like yours come in. I mean, let's talk about what you'll be working on or doing from here now. I mean, the likelihood is that we're going to have a similar conversation sometime in the near future about another brutal murder, and I'd hate to have that discussion. And then I'd want to then ask you, what have you done now? What have you done in the meantime from the point of this discussion that we're having now until whenever it is another discussion that we will have? So what will you be doing on the ground, as you say, that you're activists on the ground, working on the ground?
So what we'll be doing on the ground will just be, a continuation of what we've been doing all along. You'll remember that the Not In My Name international organization was founded on the premises of sustaining the hashtag Not In My Name social media campaign. We then said we needed to find a way that will sustain the campaign beyond just a conversation online or on social media and through our phones and tweets. We then started by assisting victims in court, assisting those who need help, linking them with psychologists, with social workers, and so on and so forth. But then we realized that by doing that, it is well and good, and it is very much needed to support the victims, and we must believe them. But it is important for us, as part of this response to this fight against the killing of women, we need to look at programs that will, assist us in what we're doing, which is why then Not In My Name as 3 pillars, which is gender equality, where we deal with these issues mainly. But secondly, we've got an education and development pillar, which deals with the development of children, socialization of both child that I spoke about. We also have programs that are, focusing on developing children. We recently partnered with an organization called Disrupt, which will be teaching young women skills around creating businesses and mentoring them through all that process. But thirdly, we've got a program around relief, whereby we give families, the poor of the poorest, to give them food, sanitary towels to women. We ensure that we are starting nutritional programs in different communities. We are giving people water. Because, Flo, we have realized that some of this violence in these families is a result of frustration, either by the men or by the women, to say that a man who cannot provide for his family monetarily, they feel that they've been stripped of their right to be, for lack of a better word, the head of the family. They resorted to violence to try and ensure that they still, retain their position of power in those families. So there are many underlying factors that lead to these violences that we see today. And we are fully aware that as an organization, we cannot do it alone. We can try and develop women and try and give people food, try and find people employment, support victims in court, have discussions with men and boys. It will still not be enough until all South Africans decide that enough is enough. It cannot be that our response to gender-based violence, it's only reactive. When something happens now, suddenly everyone becomes an activist. And then after 2 weeks, when stories die down, we're talking about something else. We need to take a conscious decision collectively, and we say that we are taking collective responsibility as members of the community, that we are going to stop this thing at all levels, and all of us must do something about it. And our programs are all in public flow. Whatever we're doing is put online for people to see, to assist, and to get involved. If they want to get involved, they can contact us at info@nimni.org. Our office is in Hatfield. Our headquarters are in Hatfield in Pretoria. We can be found there. Otherwise, you are on all social media platforms, Not in My Name International. That is what we are doing. And we are asking everyone to come and join us. It cannot be that it's business as usual.
All right. Thank you very much for giving us your time then here on SABC News. Siyabulela, Gentile, President of Civil Society Organization, Not in My Name. Thank you, sir.